I woke up at 3 in the morning to the sound of a car door slamming outside my house in suburban Phoenix, Arizona. And when I stumbled to the window half asleep, I saw a woman in a lavender bathrobe dumping what looked like several bags of garbage all over my front lawn. My name is Keith Norton, and I had lived in the Saguaro Heights subdivision for exactly 4 months, which apparently was long enough to make some serious enemies in the homeowners association. The streetlight illuminated her face just enough for me to recognize her. Brenda Carmichael, the HOA president, a 52-year-old woman with short blonde hair that she kept in that aggressive soccer mom style, the kind that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," from a mile away. She was wearing slippers that looked like they cost more than my monthly water bill, and she was moving with the efficiency of someone who had clearly done this before. I grabbed my phone and started recording through the window. The camera quality was not great in the darkness, but it was good enough to capture her license plate and her face when she turned toward the street. She emptied 4 large black garbage bags onto my lawn, and the contents spilled everywhere. Coffee grounds, food waste, papers, what looked like old magazines, and various other household trash scattered across the grass I had just mowed 2 days ago. When she drove away in her white Lexus SUV, I stood there for a moment trying to process what had just happened. This was not my first conflict with Brenda, but it was definitely the most bizarre escalation yet. The whole thing started 6 weeks ago when I painted my front door a deep navy blue instead of the approved beige or white. According to Brenda, this violated the community standards outlined in the HOA covenant. According to me, the covenant said neutral or traditional colors, and navy blue was as traditional as it got. That disagreement had spawned a series of increasingly petty violations. She cited me for leaving my trash cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours after collection. She sent me a formal warning about my lawn being a 1/4 inch too tall. She even tried to fine me for parking my own truck in my own driveway because it was a work truck with a company logo on the side. But dumping actual garbage on my lawn at 3 in the morning was a whole new level of crazy. I went outside in my pajamas and bare feet, immediately regretting that decision when I stepped on something wet and squishy. The smell hit me like a physical wall. Whatever was in these bags had been rotting for at least a few days. I pulled out my phone flashlight and started examining the mess, looking for any evidence that might prove this was Brenda's trash. That was when I found it. Nestled between a moldy takeout container and some used paper towels was an envelope. I picked it up carefully, using just 2 fingers, and turned it over. The address label read Brenda Carmichael, 2847 Desert Vista Drive, Phoenix, as 85,032. I actually laughed out loud. This woman had committed her petty crime and accidentally left a paper trail that led directly back to her mailbox. I spent the next hour going through the garbage with latex gloves I grabbed from under my kitchen sink, the ones I used when I changed the oil in my truck. I found 6 more pieces of mail with her name and address. I found a credit card statement. I found a magazine subscription label. I found a pharmacy receipt with her name printed at the top. This woman had not just dumped garbage on my lawn. She had gifted me an entire evidence package that would make any lawyer salivate. I took photographs of everything. The garbage spread across my lawn, each individual piece of mail, the credit card statement, the pharmacy receipt, everything. I made sure the timestamps were visible on each photo. Then I gathered all the evidence into a separate bag, careful to preserve everything exactly as I found it. By the time the sun came up at 6:30, I had documented everything and started researching Arizona laws about illegal dumping. Turns out, Even in a residential area, dumping trash on someone else's property is a misdemeanor offense. It could result in fines up to $2,500 and potentially jail time up to 6 months. I also learned that since she did it intentionally and in the middle of the night, it could potentially be charged as criminal littering with intent to harass. I called the non-emergency police line at 7 in the morning. The dispatcher sounded skeptical at first, probably thinking this was just another neighbor dispute that did not warrant police involvement. But when I mentioned I had video footage and that the perpetrator had left mail with her personal information mixed in with the garbage, her tone changed. "An officer will be there within the hour, Mr. Norton. Please don't touch anything else at the scene." Officer Martinez arrived at 7:45 in a patrol car, looking like he would rather be anywhere else. He was a stocky guy in his early 30s with tired eyes that suggested he had been working the night shift. But when I showed him the video on my phone and then walked him through the evidence I had collected, his demeanor shifted from bored to genuinely interested. "This is pretty cut and dry," he said, photographing the mail with Brenda's information. "The video shows her dumping it, and her own mail is mixed in with the trash. That's about as solid as evidence gets for this kind of case." "What happens now?" I asked. "I'll write up a report and forward it to the prosecutor's office. They'll decide whether to press charges. Given the evidence, I'd say it's likely. You'll probably get a call in the next few days about giving a formal statement." He took copies of all my photographs and the video file. He also took the bag with Brenda's mail and other identifying evidence. Before he left, he gave me a case number and his card. "For what it's worth," he said, "I live in an HOA neighborhood too. I know how crazy these disputes can get, but this lady really messed up by leaving her mail in there." After he left, I spent another 2 hours cleaning up the remaining garbage from my lawn. My neighbors, an elderly couple named Frank and Dorothy, came out around 9 to ask what happened. When I explained the situation, Dorothy's eyes went wide. "Brenda did this. Oh my Lord." She's always been so particular about the neighborhood looking nice. I can't believe she would dump garbage on someone's lawn. "Well, believe it," I said, tying up another garbage bag. "I've got it on video." Frank shook his head. "She cited us last year because our mailbox was fading. Made us repaint it. Cost us $150 to hire someone because I've got arthritis and couldn't do it myself. Woman's got no sense of proportion." Over the next few days, word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Turns out, Brenda had been making enemies left and right during her 3-year reign as HOA president. There was the family on Cactus Road who got fined for having a play structure in their backyard that was supposedly visible from the street. There was the guy on Mesquite Lane who got cited because his house number was in the wrong font. There was the couple on Palo Verde Drive who got harassed for months because their desert landscaping included some plants that were not on the pre-approved list. My doorbell started ringing with neighbors I had never even met before, all wanting to know if the story about Brenda dumping garbage on my lawn was true. Each of them had their own horror story about dealing with her. It became clear that this was not just about me and my navy blue door. This was about years of accumulated resentment finally finding a focal point. On Tuesday, 3 days after the incident, I got a call from the prosecutor's office. A woman named Jennifer Liu introduced herself as the assistant district attorney handling misdemeanor cases in my area. "Mr. Norton, I've reviewed the evidence in your case, and I have to say, this is one of the more straightforward illegal dumping cases I've seen. The video footage is clear, and the presence of the defendant's mail in the garbage removes any reasonable doubt about who did it. We're going to file charges." "What kind of charges?" I asked. Criminal littering with enhancement for intent to harass. It's a Class 1 misdemeanor in Arizona. If convicted, she could face up to 6 months in jail and fines up to $2,500, plus restitution for any damages to your property. How long does this process take? She'll be formally charged within the week. She'll have the option to turn herself in, or we'll issue a warrant. Given her standing in the community and the fact that this is a non-violent offense, I doubt she'll be considered a flight risk. After arraignment, it'll depend on whether she takes a plea deal or goes to trial. The idea of Brenda Carmichael being arrested was surreal. This was a woman who organized the neighborhood Christmas light competition every year. She ran the community yard sale. She sent out newsletters with clip art borders and inspirational quotes about community pride. On Thursday, I got a very angry phone call from Brenda herself. "How dare you involve the police in a neighborhood matter?" She shrieked into the phone before I could even say hello. This is exactly the kind of behavior that degrades our community standards. "You dumped 4 bags of garbage on my lawn at 3 in the morning, I said calmly. "What did you expect me to do?" "That was not garbage. That was a statement about what happens when residents refuse to follow community guidelines. You still have not repainted your door the appropriate color." "Brenda, you committed a crime. The police found your mail mixed in with the trash. There's video evidence. This is not a neighborhood dispute anymore. This is a criminal case. I want you to drop the charges immediately." "I can't drop the charges. The state is prosecuting you, not me." "This is out of my hands." She went silent for a moment. I could hear her breathing heavily on the other end of the line. "You have destroyed this neighborhood," she said finally. "Everything I have worked for, all the standards I have maintained. You're destroying it all because you can't follow simple rules about door colors. You destroyed it yourself when you decided to dump trash on my lawn instead of having a civil conversation," I replied. She hung up without another word. The following Tuesday, Brenda was formally charged. According to the Neighborhood Gossip Network, which moved faster than any internet connection, she turned herself in at the precinct with her lawyer, was processed, and released on her own recognizance within a few hours. Her arraignment was scheduled for 3 weeks later. The HOA called an emergency meeting. I received the notice in my mailbox, a formal letter stating that there would be a special session to discuss recent events affecting community leadership and address concerns about neighborhood stability. It was scheduled for the following Thursday at the community center. I almost did not go. The whole thing felt like it would be a circus. But Frank from next door convinced me that I needed to be there to tell my side of the story. "These meetings are usually just Brenda and her 2 bored cronies," he said. "Hardly anyone shows up because they don't want to deal with her, but this time will be different. This time, people are angry." He was right. When I walked into the community center at 7 o'clock that Thursday evening, the place was packed. Every chair was filled and people were standing along the walls. I recognized faces from around the neighborhood, some I had met, most I had not. The energy in the room was tense. Brenda sat at the front table with the other 2 board members, Richard Kowalski and Susan Patterson. Brenda looked like she had not slept in days. Her usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled, and she wore minimal makeup. She stared straight ahead, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Richard called the meeting to order. He was a thin man in his 60s who always wore polo shirts tucked into khaki pants. He cleared his throat nervously. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, we're facing an unusual situation with our HOA leadership. President Carmichael has been charged with a criminal offense related to an incident involving one of our residents. The board has been discussing how to handle this situation while respecting both the legal process and our community standards. She should resign, someone shouted from the back. A chorus of agreement rippled through the room. Brenda stood up abruptly. I will not resign. What happened was a misunderstanding blown completely out of proportion by a resident who has consistently refused to follow community guidelines. I have given 3 years of my life to this neighborhood, maintaining standards, organizing events, and keeping property values high. I will not be forced out by false accusations. False accusations. I stood up, my voice carrying across the room. You dumped 4 bags of garbage on my lawn at 3 in the morning. I have video footage. The police found your mail in the trash. Those are facts, not accusations. The room erupted in conversation. Multiple people started talking at once. Richard banged a gavel on the table, trying to restore order. Everyone please, he shouted. Let's maintain decorum. A woman I recognized from 3 houses down stood up. Her name was Patricia, and I remembered she had a daughter in high school. I want to know why Brenda thought it was appropriate to harass a neighbor like this. I want to know what else she's been doing that we don't know about. Because if she's willing to dump garbage on someone's lawn over a door color, what else is she willing to do? That's a fair question, said another voice. It was Thomas, a retired teacher who lived on the corner. I got fined $300 last year because my son's car was parked on the street for 3 days while he was visiting. The covenant says no street parking for more than 48 hours, but $300 for being 12 hours over. That's excessive. More people started sharing their stories. The meeting devolved into what was essentially a town hall of grievances against Brenda and her enforcement of HOA rules. Person after person stood up to describe fines, citations, and harassment over minor violations. The picture that emerged was of someone who had used her position to bully residents into compliance with increasingly petty and strict interpretations of the community covenant. Brenda sat through it all with her arms crossed, her face growing redder with each testimony. Finally, she stood up again. If you people had just followed the rules, none of this would have been necessary. I didn't create these guidelines. They were established by the original developers to maintain property values and community standards. Every single citation I issued was justified under the covenant. If you don't like the rules, then you should not have bought houses in an HOA neighborhood. There's following rules and there's being reasonable, Frank said, standing up with his wife's help. You fined us for a fading mailbox. You cited the Hendersons for having the wrong color flowers in their front bed. You tried to make the Patels take down their American flag because it was 2 inches larger than the approved size. That's not maintaining standards. That's being a tyrant. Susan Patterson, who had been silent up until this point, cleared her throat. She was a soft-spoken woman in her late 40s who worked as a librarian. I think we need to consider whether Brenda should remain in her position while facing criminal charges. The optics alone are damaging to our community's reputation. I second that, Richard said quickly. I move that we vote on whether to temporarily suspend Brenda from her position as president pending the resolution of her legal issues. You can't do that. Brenda slammed her hand on the table. The bylaws state that only a majority vote of homeowners can remove a board member, not a board decision. That's correct, Richard said, pulling out a copy of the bylaws. Which is why I'm proposing we hold that vote right now. We have more than the required quorum present. According to Article 7, Section 3, we can call for an immediate vote on removal of a board member if more than 30% of homeowners are present, and the motion is seconded by another board member. I second the motion, Susan said. Richard quickly counted the attendees against the neighborhood roster. Out of 147 homes in the subdivision, 83 homeowners were present, either in person or by proxy. That was more than enough for a valid vote. The vote was not even close. 78 voted to remove Brenda from the board immediately. Only 5 voted against it, including Brenda herself. The room erupted in applause. Brenda gathered her papers with shaking hands. "You're all making a huge mistake. Property values will plummet without proper enforcement of standards. This neighborhood will turn into a circus." "The only circus was your presidency," someone called out. She left without another word, walking out of the community center with her head held high but her hands visibly trembling. After she left, the meeting continued. Richard was voted in as interim president. They established a committee to review all the citations and fines that had been issued over the past 3 years to determine which ones were reasonable and which ones were excessive. They also voted to amend the enforcement procedures to require board approval before issuing any fine over $100. As I was leaving, several neighbors came up to thank me. Patricia, the woman with the high school daughter, shook my hand. "If you had not reported her to the police, we never would have had the leverage to get her out. She would have kept bullying people forever. Thank you for standing up to her." "I just didn't want garbage on my lawn," I said, "but I'm glad something good came out of it." The criminal case moved forward. Brenda's lawyer tried to get the charges dismissed, arguing that this was a civil matter between neighbors and should not be handled by the criminal justice system. The judge disagreed. The video evidence and the mail found in the garbage made it clear that this was intentional illegal dumping, not a neighborly dispute. Brenda rejected several plea deals. The prosecutors offered her a deal that would involve no jail time, just probation, community service, and restitution for the cleanup costs. She refused, insisting she would be vindicated at trial. Her lawyer looked exhausted every time I saw him at the courthouse. The trial was scheduled for September, about 5 months after the incident. I spent the intervening months actually enjoying my neighborhood for the first time since I had moved in. The new HOA board took a much more relaxed approach to enforcement. They focused on genuine issues like structural safety and major covenant violations while ignoring the petty stuff that Brenda had obsessed over. I even repainted my door, not because anyone made me, but because I decided I wanted a change. I went with a dark green this time. Nobody sent me a citation. The trial lasted 3 days. It was held in the Maricopa County Superior Court, and I testified on the first day. The prosecutor, Jennifer Liu, walked me through the events of that night. I described waking up to the sound of the car door, looking out the window, seeing Brenda dump the garbage, and finding her mail mixed in with the trash. Brenda's lawyer tried to poke holes in my testimony during cross-examination. "Mr. Norton, isn't it true that you had multiple disputes with Mrs. Carmichael prior to this incident?" "Yes, that's true." "And isn't it possible that you were motivated by these disputes to fabricate evidence against her?" "No, the video speaks for itself." "And I didn't put her mail in those garbage bags. She did that herself." "But you admit you had a motive to harm her reputation." "I had a motive to get garbage off my lawn and find out who put it there. The evidence showed it was her. I didn't fabricate anything." The video was played for the jury on a large screen. Even in the dim streetlight, Brenda was clearly identifiable. You could see her bathrobe, her face when she turned toward the street, and her license plate. The jury watched in silence as she systematically emptied all 4 bags across my lawn. On the second day, Officer Martinez testified about responding to the scene and the evidence he collected. The prosecutor introduced photographs of all the mail and documents with Brenda's name and address. The credit card statement, the pharmacy receipt, the magazine labels, everything was displayed for the jury. The defense tried to argue that someone could have stolen Brenda's garbage and dumped it on my lawn to frame her. But they could not explain the video showing Brenda herself doing the dumping. They suggested the video could have been edited or manipulated, but a digital forensics expert testified that the video was authentic and unaltered. Brenda testified on the third day. It did not go well for her. She maintained that she had not dumped any garbage on my lawn, despite the video evidence. She claimed the person in the video could have been someone else wearing similar clothing and driving a similar car. Mrs. Carmichael, the prosecutor said during cross-examination, do you own a white Lexus SUV with license plate number 7 Charlie Fox 8291? Yes. And do you own a lavender bathrobe like the one shown in the video? Yes, but lots of people have similar items. Mrs. Carmichael, the video shows your face. The officer identified you from your driver's license photo. Your mail was found in the garbage. How do you explain all of this? Brenda's composure cracked. He has been making my life impossible. He refused to follow community standards. He painted his door that ridiculous blue color. He parked his work truck in full view of the street. Someone had to make him understand that rules matter. Someone had to show him that you can't just do whatever you want in a community with standards. The courtroom went silent. Her lawyer put his head in his hands. So you're admitting that you dumped the garbage on his lawn? Jennifer asked. Brenda seemed to realize what she had said. No, that's not what I meant. But you just said someone had to make him understand. Were you that someone, Mrs. Carmichael? I want to invoke my Fifth Amendment right, Brenda said suddenly. It's a little late for that, the judge said. You've already testified and answered questions. You can't selectively invoke the Fifth Amendment now. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. They found Brenda guilty of criminal littering with intent to harass. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. At the sentencing hearing, Jennifer Liu argued for jail time, pointing out that Brenda had shown no remorse, had rejected multiple plea deals, had perjured herself on the stand, and had only admitted to the crime when she had an emotional outburst. Brenda's lawyer argued for leniency, citing her previous clean record and her community involvement. He presented letters from some of the neighbors who still supported her, though there were not many of those. The judge looked at Brenda directly. Mrs. Carmichael, you had multiple opportunities to resolve this case without trial. You were offered deals that would have involved no jail time. Instead, you chose to put the court and the jury through a trial where you repeatedly lied under oath. Then you admitted to the crime in an outburst before trying to take it back. This shows a complete lack of respect for the legal system and a failure to take responsibility for your actions. I sentence you to 90 days in county jail, suspended to 30 days with credit for time served if you comply with probation terms. You will serve 2 years of supervised probation. You will complete 200 hours of community service. You will pay restitution to Mr. Norton in the amount of $450 for cleanup and lawn repair costs. You will also pay court costs and fees. Additionally, you are prohibited from serving in any HOA leadership position during your probation period. Brenda started crying. Her lawyer put his hand on her shoulder. Furthermore, the judge continued, I am ordering you to undergo anger management counseling. Your behavior in this case suggests you have difficulty controlling your impulses and respecting boundaries. I hope you use this time to reflect on why you thought it was acceptable to harass your neighbor over something as trivial as a door color. Brenda was taken into custody immediately to begin serving her 30 days. The bailiff led her out of the courtroom in handcuffs while she sobbed. I felt a strange mix of emotions watching her being led away. Part of me felt vindicated. She had harassed me and many others in the neighborhood for years, and now she was facing real consequences. But part of me also felt sad that it had come to this. If she had just been reasonable from the start, if she had just accepted that people can have different interpretations of community standards, none of this would have happened. After the sentencing, several reporters approached me outside the courthouse. Apparently, the story had gotten some attention in local media. HOA president jailed for dumping garbage on residents' lawn made for a good headline. Mr. Norton, how do you feel about the sentence? One reporter asked. I think justice was served. I hope Mrs. Carmichael learns from this experience. I never wanted to see her go to jail. I just wanted her to stop harassing me and respect boundaries. Do you think HOAs in general have too much power? I think HOAs can serve a useful purpose when they are run by reasonable people who understand that their role is to maintain genuine community standards, not to micromanage every aspect of residents' lives. The problem is when you get someone in power who uses their position to bully others. That's not about maintaining standards. That's about control. Over the next few months, things settled down in the neighborhood. Brenda served her 30 days and was released. She moved out of the neighborhood shortly after, selling her house to a young couple with twin toddlers. I heard through the gossip network that she moved to a different part of Phoenix, to a house that was not part of an HOA. The new HOA board under Richard's leadership worked well. They enforced the rules that mattered, like keeping properties maintained and addressing safety issues, but they stopped obsessing over minor aesthetic details. The neighborhood became a more pleasant place to live. Frank and Dorothy invited me over for dinner one evening about 6 months after the trial. We sat on their back patio, eating Dorothy's famous enchiladas and watching the sun set over the mountains. You know, Frank said, I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years. The last 3 with Brenda in charge were the worst. Every day there was some new citation, some new rule interpretation, some new thing to worry about. I was seriously considering selling and moving somewhere without an HOA. We both were, Dorothy added. But now, it actually feels like a community again. People are talking to each other at the mailboxes instead of avoiding eye contact. There are kids playing in the street again because their parents are not terrified of getting cited for having toys visible in the yard. I'm glad something good came out of all this, I said, though I could have done without having 4 bags of garbage dumped on my lawn at 3 in the morning. The universe works in mysterious ways, Dorothy said with a smile. Sometimes it takes something extreme to shake people out of complacency. Everyone knew Brenda was a problem, but nobody wanted to be the first one to really stand up to her. You didn't have a choice, and in a weird way, that was what the neighborhood needed. I received the restitution check from Brenda a few weeks later, $450, exactly as ordered by the judge. There was no note, no apology, just the check. I deposited it and used the money to buy some new landscaping for my front yard. I replaced some of the grass that had been damaged by the garbage with native desert plants. They looked nice and required less water, which seemed like a responsible choice for living in Arizona. The neighborhood moved on. New residents moved in, unaware of the drama that had transpired. The community newsletters, now written by Susan Patterson, focused on upcoming events and maintenance reminders rather than enforcement threats. The annual Christmas light competition still happened, but without Brenda's rigid judging criteria and threats of fines for displays she deemed excessive or tasteless. I kept my navy blue door for another year before eventually repainting it dark green. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I felt like a change. That was the point, really. Being able to make choices about my own property without fear of someone dumping garbage on my lawn or issuing arbitrary fines. About a year after the trial, I ran into Brenda at a grocery store in Phoenix. We were both in the produce section, reaching for avocados at the same time. She saw me and froze. "Hello, Brenda," I said. She looked different. Her hair was longer, less aggressively styled. She was not wearing makeup, and she looked tired but somehow more relaxed than I had ever seen her. "Keith," she said quietly, "I did not expect to see you here. It's a big city but small world sometimes." She picked up an avocado, examined it, and put it in her basket. "I owe you an apology," she said without looking at me. "What I did was wrong. I let my need for control override my judgment and my decency. I spent 30 days in jail and 2 years on probation thinking about why I acted the way I did. My therapist says I have issues with anxiety and control that I was projecting onto the neighborhood. That's not an excuse, but it's an explanation. I did not know what to say. I had not expected this. I'm sorry for dumping garbage on your lawn. I'm sorry for all the harassment before that. I'm sorry for making your life difficult over something as stupid as a door color. You were right. I was being a tyrant. I convinced myself I was protecting property values and maintaining standards, but really I was just trying to control everything around me because my own life felt out of control." "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "I never wanted things to escalate the way they did. I just wanted to live in my house in peace. You should not have had to fight for that. It should have been a given. I made the neighborhood into a place where people were afraid instead of comfortable. That was wrong." We stood there for a moment in the produce section, two people who had been bitter enemies now just having a conversation. "How are you doing now?" I asked. "Better. I'm still in therapy. I do not live in an HOA neighborhood anymore, which is probably better for everyone. I volunteer at a food bank for my community service hours. It's given me perspective. When you're helping people who are worried about where their next meal is coming from, you realize how absurd it is to obsess over door colors and mailbox fonts. That's good. I'm glad you're doing better." "How's the neighborhood?" "Good. Richard is doing a great job as president. Things are much more relaxed. People actually seem to enjoy living there now," she nodded. "Good, that's how it should be. I really am sorry, Keith, for everything." "I forgive you," I said, and realized I meant it. "We all make mistakes. What matters is learning from them." She gave me a small, sad smile. "Thank you. That means more than you know." We said goodbye, and I watched her walk away down the aisle. I felt a sense of closure that I had not realized I needed. The whole situation had been surreal and frustrating and exhausting. But seeing her now, seeing that she had genuinely reflected on her actions and was trying to be better, made it feel like maybe the whole ordeal had served some purpose beyond just getting her removed from the HOA board. 2 years after the incident, the HOA held its annual meeting to elect new board members. I had been asked by several neighbors to run for a position, but I declined. I had no interest in being part of HOA politics, even with a reasonable board. I just wanted to live in my house, work my job as a contractor, and enjoy my life without drama. Richard decided not to run for another term, saying he had only agreed to serve as interim president to stabilize things after Brenda's removal. A new slate of candidates ran, all of them reasonable people who understood the balance between maintaining standards and respecting residents' autonomy. The neighborhood was in good hands. I did agree to serve on the Architectural Review Committee, though. The committee was responsible for reviewing requests for major exterior changes like room additions, new roofs, and significant landscaping projects. It seemed like a good way to give back to the community without taking on a major leadership role. Plus, I could help ensure that the committee took a reasonable approach to evaluations rather than getting bogged down in petty details. Our first meeting involved reviewing a request from a family who wanted to add a second-story deck to their house. Under Brenda's presidency, this request would have been denied immediately because the plans showed deck railings in a shade of brown that was not on the pre-approved color list. Our committee approved it within 15 minutes because the overall design was attractive, structurally sound, and consistent with the neighborhood aesthetic. The fact that the railing was off-white instead of pure white was irrelevant. Life continued. The seasons changed. Phoenix summers came and went with their brutal 115-degree days. Winter brought pleasant weather and snowbirds from colder climates. The neighborhood hosted block parties and holiday celebrations. Kids rode bikes in the streets. Dogs barked at the mail carrier. Life was normal, which was exactly what everyone wanted. 3 years after the garbage incident, I was in my front yard installing new landscape lighting when a moving truck pulled up across the street. A new family was moving into the house that had just sold. I watched as a couple in their 30s directed movers carrying furniture and boxes. They had 2 kids, maybe 6 and 8 years old, who were running around excited about the new house. I walked over after they had gotten most of the furniture inside. The husband was standing on the front porch, looking satisfied. "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said. "I'm Keith Norton. I live in the house right across the street." "Thanks. I'm Mike Harrison. This is my wife, Julie. Kids are Emma and Noah, probably around here somewhere causing chaos." "Great to meet you. If you need anything, recommendations for restaurants, good mechanics, whatever, just let me know." "We appreciate that. We're actually really excited about the HOA here. The realtor said this community has really reasonable policies and an active but not overbearing board. That was important to us. Our last neighborhood had an HOA that was absolutely insane." I could not help but laugh. "Really? What happened?" The president was this woman who was just completely obsessed with control. She fined us for everything. Our lawn was a 1/4 inch too tall one week. Our Christmas decorations were up 2 days past the approved takedown date. She tried to fine us because our daughter left her bike on the driveway overnight. It was exhausting. "Yeah, I know exactly what you mean," I said. "This neighborhood actually had a similar problem a few years ago. But it got resolved. The current board is great. They focus on the stuff that actually matters and don't sweat the small details." That's such a relief to hear. We were worried about jumping from one bad HOA situation into another. "You'll be fine here. Everyone's pretty laid back. The rules make sense and the enforcement is reasonable. You can actually enjoy your house without constantly worrying about citations. That's all we want, just to live in peace, you know." "I know exactly what you mean," I said. As I walked back to my house, I thought about how much had changed in 3 years. A neighborhood that had been tense and unhappy had transformed into an actual community. All because one person's need for control had finally gone too far, leaving evidence of her own crime scattered across my lawn mixed with her personal mail. Sometimes the most absurd situations lead to the most important changes. Sometimes it takes something as ridiculous as a HOA president dumping garbage on your lawn at 3 in the morning to finally unite a community against unreasonable authority. Sometimes justice looks like 30 days in jail and a restitution check for $450. And sometimes the best outcome is simply being able to live in your house with a navy blue door or a dark green door or whatever color you want, without fear of waking up to garbage on your lawn. That might not sound like much, but for those of us who had lived through Brenda's reign of terror, it was everything. I finished installing my landscape lights as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. My navy blue door, which I had eventually repainted and then repainted again to dark green, and which I had recently changed to a deep red because I liked how it looked, stood out against the beige stucco of my house. Nobody had sent me a citation. Nobody had complained. Nobody had dumped garbage on my lawn. The neighborhood was at peace. Property values were fine. Standards were being maintained where it mattered, and everyone could finally just live their lives without constantly looking over their shoulders, waiting for the next petty violation notice. Frank and Dorothy waved at me from their front porch. The Harrison kids were riding bikes in the street, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Somewhere a dog barked. The smell of someone grilling dinner drifted through the air. This was what a community was supposed to feel like. It had taken a criminal trial and a lot of drama to get here, but we had arrived, and it was worth it. I walked inside my house, satisfied with the light installation, and made myself dinner. Through my front window I could see the street, peaceful and quiet. No white Lexus SUVs creeping around at 3 in the morning. No garbage bags waiting to be dumped on unsuspecting lawns. No HOA presidents losing their minds over door colors. Just a normal neighborhood in suburban Phoenix, where people could live their lives, paint their doors whatever color they wanted, and trust that their neighbors were not going to harass them over trivial nonsense. It had taken 3 years, a criminal trial, and a lot of stress to get there. But looking around at the peaceful neighborhood, at the kids playing in the street, at the friendly waves between neighbors, I knew it had been worth the fight. Some battles choose you. You do not seek them out. They show up in the form of garbage bags on your lawn at 3 in the morning, dumped there by someone who should have known better. And when those battles choose you, sometimes the only option is to see them through to the end, to stand up for yourself and, inadvertently, for everyone else who was too afraid to make waves. The garbage on my lawn had been Brenda's biggest mistake. If she had just sent me another citation, another fine, another nasty letter about my door color, I might have eventually given in. I might have repainted the door just to make the harassment stop. But by dumping trash on my lawn and leaving her own mail mixed in with it, she had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. She had committed a crime, left evidence, and set in motion a series of events that ultimately freed an entire neighborhood from her tyranny. In a weird way, I was almost grateful. If it had not happened, I would still be dealing with petty citations. Frank and Dorothy would still be living in fear of minor violations. The Harrisons would have moved into a miserable situation instead of a welcoming community. Dozens of families would still be under the thumb of someone who cared more about control than community. Instead, we had peace. We had a functional HOA that served its actual purpose without becoming a tool for one person's control issues. We had a neighborhood where people smiled at each other instead of avoiding eye contact out of fear. All because Brenda Carmichael could not handle someone having a navy blue door, and because she was careless enough to leave her mail in the garbage she dumped on my lawn. I finished my dinner and settled in for the evening, comfortable in my home, surrounded by a community that finally felt like one. The fight had been exhausting. The process had been frustrating, but the outcome had made it all worthwhile. Sometimes standing up for yourself means going through hell. Sometimes it means police reports and trials, and seeing someone you know get led away in handcuffs. Sometimes it means becoming the focal point of neighborhood gossip, and dealing with reporters and spending hours cleaning up garbage that someone else dumped on your property. But sometimes, that fight is exactly what needs to happen, not just for you, but for everyone who comes after you. For the families who will move into the neighborhood and never know how bad it used to be. For the neighbors who finally feel safe in their own homes. For the community that can finally function the way it was supposed to all along. I turned off the lights and headed to bed, the same bed I had stumbled out of 3 years ago at 3 in the morning when I heard a car door slam outside. But this time, there was no white Lexus. No bathrobe-clad HOA president dumping garbage on my lawn. Just the peaceful quiet of a neighborhood that had finally found its equilibrium. And that, ultimately, was worth all the garbage, both literal and figurative, that I had to deal with to get here. The story of how an HOA president's petty revenge became her downfall would be told in this neighborhood for years to come. It would serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting power go to your head, about the importance of treating your neighbors with respect, and about the foolishness of committing crimes while leaving your personal mail mixed in with the evidence. As I drifted off to sleep, I smiled thinking about how absurd the whole situation had been. In a city of millions, in a subdivision of hundreds, in a dispute about door colors and community standards, justice had prevailed in the most unlikely way possible. All because someone made the critical error of being both vindictive and careless at the same time. The neighborhood was better for it. The HOA was better for it. And I could finally live in peace, with my red door and my desert landscaping and my work truck in the driveway, without fear of midnight garbage deliveries or endless harassment from someone who should have known better. It was a strange journey, but it had led to exactly the right destination.